And we're back with Daniel Borman again for another segment, the seventh segment of The Secret of the Golden Flower. Today we're going to talk about the living manner of the circulation of the light. Master Lu said, "When there's a gradual success in producing the circulation of the light, a man must not give up on his ordinary occupation in doing it. The ancients said, when occupations come to us, we must accept them. When things come to us, we must understand them from the ground up. If the occupations are properly handled by correct thoughts, the light is not scattered by outside things, but circulates according to its own law. Even the still invisible circulation of the light gets started this way. How much more then is it the case with the true circulation of the light, which has already manifested itself clearly? When in ordinary life, one has the ability always to react to things by reflexes only, without any admixture of thought of others or of oneself, that is a circulation of the light arising out of circumstances. This is the first secret. If early in the morning one can rid oneself of all entanglements and meditate from 1 to 2 hours, 2 double hours, and then can orientate oneself towards all activities and outside things in a purely objective, reflex way. And if this can be continued without any interruption, then after 2 or 3 months, all the perfected ones come from heaven and approve such a behavior." They approve it. And that's it. That is the short chapter 7.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, Daniel, it's been a while. How are you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, feeling really good about my meditation practice lately. Doing my best to incorporate this circulation of the light at the very end of my practice. And I find that the state of simplifying the meditation is very necessary for this feeling of continued quietness or responsiveness to be reachable throughout the day. When I'm doing more of an active meditation, I find that this objective response to my life is less available than if I were to just spend potentially all of my time doing this type of meditation. The way that it's described here is a purely objective reflex way. So I'm really trying to cultivate that more in my life.
Yeah, what does that mean to you? Like, it's tough sometimes to get a grasp on certain situations and objectivity in general. How does that land on you?
Well, I think the grasp for me personally is the feeling when there is this upward moving of energy that comes from my abdomen area or even the lower part of my body that is responding to things. If I don't have this purely objective, reflexive way of reacting to my life, I notice that upward reactivity to be a bit more volatile and coming from a place of reactivity as opposed to response to my environment. And this spaciousness, this moment of resting and being is less available to me. And I have noticed it when I have the spaciousness to do a longer meditation, then I find myself less reactive and more responsive to my life.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sure. And how would you distinguish objective from subjective?
Well, I think objective is a concrete observation of the senses and what they are literally being experienced as or through. for instance, this smells this particular way, this feels this particular way, it sounds this particular way. And then the subjective is our interpretation of those experiences. And if you think about it in the scientific realm, the objective is that which can be quantified and measured in a repeatable manner. And this is what's created the scientific method, where people can use the same set of measurements and tools and come to the same results. And so the way that makes sense in our physical body is through the senses, I believe. And then the subjectivity is our interpretation of the senses, or how we are perceiving our senses to interact with the world. Now, there is variabilities with how your senses perceive things versus how my senses perceive things. So within the objective realm, there is not any way to make all of our senses quantifiably the same in the same way as the scientific method with an external instrument or objective measurement tool. But I do find that the ancients used the senses as the kind of underlying basis for objective reality. And then, yeah, the subjective is our interpretation of our senses.
Yeah. So then how, because you were mentioning your active meditation has a different effect than this one. How I'm curious how that ties together with this potential, or does it to attach to itself to the objective subjective approach?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I suppose with the active meditation, I have this efforting that's there that feels as if I'm going somewhere. There is more of this propelled energy in the meditation. I want to achieve a certain amount of repetitions, a certain amount of mantra repetitions, so that I feel complete and done, compared to a more receptive and quality of being meditation. So I don't necessarily think it's a difference of objectivity and subjectivity. I think they're both there in each of them. But I think that the active meditation, the objective instruments are, let's say, used in a more proactive way, where, or how about this? They're put more on the back burner, where I'm not necessarily as in tune with what I'm experiencing, because I'm more in tune with the frequency of the mantra and really trying to make that the focal point of the meditation. And then that creates this single pointed focus that allows everything else just to be as it is, but I'm not necessarily paying it as much attention. And compared to the circulation of the light meditation, where there is this more so an open monitoring of the light, and these focal points throughout the energetic system, but they are held in a more soft gaze as opposed to this more sharp gaze. And I think it lends the circulation of the light meditation lends itself to a quality where our subjective interpretation has more space to contemplate, as it says, and so that fixation, I believe, in the japa meditation is more pronounced, and the contemplation is less important potentially for me, while the circulation of the light, I feel as if they hold an equal weight. That makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah. The things, as you were speaking, I was thinking it's almost as if the subjective is like, what's the matter? The subjectivity generally has more weight to it because it's more entangled with preferences, and the objective is stripped of that, and so it's just lighter in general, and it's more spacious. And so again, I think that it's always good to have multiple approaches, or in this case, having an active meditation and a passive, to focus on both of those aspects and how they land in each different meditative circumstance. Because they definitely seem to highlight things in a different way. in this
Mhm.
passive way of this sort of, like you said, a softer gaze at the circumstance, so to speak, and the harder gaze on trying to keep yourself focused on the japa or the story that you're chanting or the visualization that you're trying to crystallize within your mind.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, so the thing that popped out to me in this first page was, where does it say? Oh, not to give up the ordinary occupation of doing things. That's a peculiar thing. Do you think that relates to your work, or do you think that relates to something else?
Hmm.
When occupations come to us.
I think this has to do something to do with surrender. Occupations maybe is another way of saying tasks. When occupations or a duty, a task come to us, we must accept them. When things come to us, we must understand them from the ground up. Yeah, it's hard to know whether they're talking specifically about a meditative state of mind here, or whether they're talking about using a meditative state of mind in the realm of occupation or task-oriented thinking behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Not clear on that. But if they are talking about actual daily living, then potentially that could mean that it's a surrendering, a constant surrendering to what is and responding to what is,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, which is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
Uh, and so we must understand them from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, the ground up. I mean, I think that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. The word ground is also used a lot in Buddhist thinking. Ground, the groundedness of being. So there's often this behavior or this patterning in Buddhist thinking that happens with this responsiveness to everything from a grounded sense of being or the grounded being state, which I think is, in my opinion, meaning just seeing things as they are, not interpreting things based upon your own subjective story of how things are, but
Right.
really doing one's best to strip away the story and seeing things as they are,
Mm-hmm.
which potentially is a quality that the fixation can bring. And then in this moment, the contemplation is, how we feel about things, how we interpret things. It can almost be put aside in the response of what we're encountering. For instance, if you're encountering some difficulty in your meditation practice, let's say some desires coming up, some feeling of let's say just mental disturbance about a past experience or a memory, then the grounded state of being is just observing that, seeing it as it is, and understanding that you can respond to it from the ground up. You don't necessarily need to react to it. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so, in the same way, when we're going about our life and somebody says, "Hey, you didn't do this thing right," or "Hey, I have some observations and some requests for you," then the way to take that in is from a grounded state of being where you're just observing with a fixated point of view what they're saying and doing one's best to not have any sort of story overlay that and just see it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Not an easy thing to do, but um, I suppose when we're less reactive over time, then our meditations become more and more clear because we're not ruminating on past mistakes or having a subtle fear of repeating them in the future because
Mm-hmm.
we've responded correctly in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing that comes to mind to me is priorities from the ground up. It has to do with having yourself orientated properly with a stable foundation, so to speak.
Mhm.
If our priorities are not founded in some sense of objectivity, then you're kind of always subject to the shifting sands of life. And yet the subjectivity, I still think, is a heavier thing, but it seems also like it's also waterier. And so it sort of needs a container for its weightiness.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess that's that's good. I appreciate all those. That's a lot of insight there. And then it kind of elaborates here as to what you're talking about with the circulating can become scattered by outside things, but circulates according to its own law. So by holding the center, the outside stimulus ceases to knock you out of your center.
Mhm. Yeah, and it reminds me of the point that you made, I believe in chapter 3, maybe it was 2, around the squinting of the eyes, or the half shutting of the eyes, and how light flows into the eyes and circulates and nourishes the energetic system, and then thereby concentrates the light. And so possibly the way that light is scattered is not only through the gaze of our eyes through our daily life, let's say like when we're in traffic or feeling really spread out, let's say with a really stimulating environment, then our eyes are tracking all of these things, and we could potentially become scattered because of that. In the same way, if our internal experience is just going 10 miles an hour, or a million miles an hour, and all of these subjective interpretations are coming, overlaying our observations, and we're giving them attention like we would a stimulating environment out in the external world. In the same way, it can kind of scatter the light and not concentrate it, which is the point of even developing this movement of energy and concentration of the light.
Mm-hmm. Right. And now also mentioning the reflexes. When in ordinary life, one has the ability always to react to things by reflex only, sort of elaborates on what we were talking about with being knocked out of your center without any admixture of thought of others or of oneself, which speaks to what you're talking about with someone giving you observations and requests. Oftentimes the observations, they're probably at least somewhat tolerable, but sometimes the requests are the hard things to really honor. And when we're just impulsively responding, we wind up disrespecting ourselves by falling out of the harmonious, peaceful state that the heart naturally wants to be in, and fall into this disorder of jumbled confusion.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that it says this is the first secret. The thought about that is the circulation of the light arising out of circumstances. It's the first secret. What do you think that first secret really means? Like it seems kind of like a sneaky little thing there, doesn't it? It doesn't seem like it's emphasized very much. Unless
I
I'm missing
suppose it's a relinquishing of the concept of I, me, and mine, and ownership of anything that you do. It kind of reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita, constant narrative of I think it's me that's doing things, but it's actually not me. It's a higher consciousness that's coming through me, and therefore I can relinquish the fruits of my labor or the fruits of my work, because it's actually not me that's doing anything. Although, of course, in some ways it is, because the personality is intact and it has its needs and preferences. And we know all about the personality in the West. We spent a long time studying it. But I think the underlying concept in a lot of Eastern thinking is that there is no one there. There isn't truly no one home. And that's in some ways also this ground of beingness that I think is talked a lot about in Buddhist texts. And it's hard to quite grasp, because as soon as, you've talked about this a lot, as soon as you try to grasp it or talk about it, you're in some ways you can even get further from it, because it's such a subtle thing.
Yeah.
Where we differentiate ourselves from the personality or from any one home or anyone that has any thought of others or of oneself. So you're not even thinking of other people, nor are you thinking of yourself.
Right.
You're literally just responding to what is.
Right.
And it's definitely not easy to do. And that's why I think they say this is the first secret.
The first secret. It reminds me of, I've been writing about Eros and Psyche, the Greek myth of their coming together. And Eros is as if to be the subjective, the libido, and Psyche is as if to be the objective. So within the Psyche flows this torrential river of the libido, and without the proper containing of it, and there's all these things that Psyche has to go through in order to become a proper container for Eros. And likewise, Eros goes through some learning things as well. But it seems like the subjectivity, if we don't have an open objective Psyche, the subjectivity gets clogged. And then when it gets clogged, it gets agitated. And the agitations create problems for everybody, for you and for me. Can't take criticism, can't, you have hangups, as they call it. And a cool way of looking at this meditation is in very many ways focusing on the objectivity and gently holding the subjectivity, this plunging, as we were talking about earlier in the book, the light into the deep waters of the anima, and thereby clarifying it and purifying it. It seems like a interesting analogy. I'm not sure if it's accurate, but to me it makes sense.
It makes sense to me too.
So I don't know what 2 double hours are. But if early in the morning one can rid oneself of all entanglements and meditate for 1 to 2 double hours, probably means 4 hours, and then can orientate oneself towards all activities and outside things in a purely objective, reflex way. And if this can be continued without interruption, then you eventually get perfected. You become the perfected ones come down from heaven and approach and approve of such behavior, which sounds very much just like, when you fall into a healthy rhythm of sadhana, you just know after you're done with your meditation, boy, life is just a treat. You get up from your mat and you're like, wow, it's so wonderful just to have my morning hot beverage, coffee, tea, whatever you want to call it, and then having breakfast, and you just have this wonderful flow to life. And when you get sick and you can't do your meditation, it's amazing how quickly your body's like, I don't like this. I'm not used to this not meditating lifestyle. But Conversely, it's also difficult when you're first starting out your meditation. Did you have any like resistance to your meditative practice before you started making it into a routine in your life?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's always blocks there. I think timing is the biggest thing. Those, staying up too late is a big thing. The one of my teachers says that sleeping in is the number one reason why people don't meditate. uh, yeah, so just sleeping in too late, because I think there is something about this, you know, zone right before. It doesn't even have to be, when it's dark out, but just when the sun is fresh. Let's just call it early morning. It's just much easier to drop into a meditation then, because life there isn't as much activity in the world yet. And then by the time it gets around 7:30 or 8, you start to energetically feel that things are moving forward, and it's hard not to notice that. And then the mind becomes much more active.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it has a lot to do with timing and being in good relationship with time. Uh, at the on at the beginning stages. Now, if you miss the early morning, there's always time at noon, and there's always time at sunset. That's what I tell myself, or I tell my clients, is that just because you miss the morning one doesn't mean your whole day, you shouldn't meditate. You can always make it up at high noon and also as the sun is setting, because traditionally those are the three main times: sunrise, high noon, and sunset were the three primary times to meditate, because the energy is very palpable then. So I think when people get over that, like, oh, I don't have enough time mentality, then it's a little easier to drop into a meditation, even if it isn't their preferred time. That was a big learning lesson for me, that just because I miss morning doesn't mean that I have a free day. I need to do it either at noon or in the evening. Um, so that was a big hang up for me early on, and still is at some moments, because lifestyle varies. We have a lot of things going on in our lives. Um, but the other primary block is when there's this subtle resistance where you feel as if the practice is scraping your insides, or just purifying you in a way where you're having to like look at things. And for a lot of people, this is really hard, because they're seeing the fickleness of their own consciousness, their own attention, and they don't like to look at themselves. They don't like to look at parts of themselves that need work. They would rather find a stream of concentration, doing things that they maybe enjoy. A lot of people find deep concentration while searching for things, or our hunter-gatherer instincts are very strong. So that's why shopping and consumerism plays right into that. When we're feeling a little distracted, a lot of people like to go shopping, or like to find an outlet so that they can feel this focus and peace that comes with it. And I don't blame them. There's a lot of distracting things in our life. Or for instance, social media, which really in a lot of ways is taking the role as the commons in a village, where we're able to see and hear stories about things going on beyond our own story and our own immediate circle of people we interact with. So in other ways, it helps us tend to this need for story and community. And it's the gossip circle that no longer exists in the commons of the village or the tribe or whatever. I think those two things are huge distractions for people, just thinking about things outside of their very personal and private contemplative exercise. Those are the main things that I can think of in terms of hangups that can potentially affect me and also the clients that I talk to.
Wow. So I've been thinking about this since I've been living on the 49th parallel. The sun rises, or at least it's like dusk around 4 o'clock here. And it's I mean, I'm sorry, it's dawn about 4 o'clock here, and it's like
Right.
dusk about almost 10 o'clock. The whole rhythm, that of getting up before sunrise, like the Brahma Muhurta,
Mhm.
how does that work with the closer you get, like, or even if you're living in Alaska when you got 24 hours of sunlight, how does that play out?
Um, well, I think that it is very or in my opinion, from what I've heard, is that a lot of those concepts are based upon a equator point of view. And so things need to be varied based upon that. I do think if somebody's available for it, getting up even at sunrise, if they're in a very north or south latitude, can potentially be fruitful. But then they would need to be napping in the middle of the day.
Mhm.
And I don't actually know anyone that does that, because I think it's not it doesn't feel natural. So I think it needs to be taken in cultural context as well. Uh, everything is a spectrum, and there's no hard and fast rules. So Brahmana Muhurta could potentially manifest at a slightly later time for people that live in a northern altitude or latitude, because of the fact that there is just less daylight. Now, some people may debate me on that, where it's 2 hours before the sunrise. That's what it says. So it needs to constantly shift based upon where one is. But if the sun's rising at 4, to get up at 2 in the morning to meditate doesn't really make much sense, especially if you're going to bed at 10. So when the sun sets. So I think in the same way that the sun exists in different places in all of our charts, and needs to be fine-tuned for us based upon where it is, then I think also too that things can be altered based upon where somebody lives geographically.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I've never heard anybody even debate about that before, and so yeah, it's just a unique circumstance being here, and
Mhm.
sometimes I just feel really lazy sometimes, or like at least questioning when I even do get up super early. It's like, wow, it's already almost light here, and yeah. So anyway, it's an interesting thought that
Definitely.
doesn't necessarily always come up. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts about this one? It's a kind of a short one, but it's sort of nails a lot of the other commentary down.
Yeah, it's short, but yeah, it's potent. Yeah, I kind of like the very last sentence, and it reminds me, after 2 or 3 months, which is not very long, by the way,
Right.
all the perfected ones come from heaven and approve such behavior. It reminds me, of certain songs that I sing to the archangels. And the archangels in the Western, let's call it Latin based Judeo-Christian point of view, are these archetypes that humans can look to and be like, wow, that they are somewhat of a heavenly representation of what a human could be. And I suppose this is, just me talking about things that are coming from my subjective experience. So nothing to do with the text necessarily, but potentially when one is in a state of receptivity in the circulation of the light, the subtle body or the aura of somebody can become subtle enough or transparent enough to the influence of the divine,
Mhm.
where that which they're focusing on, or that which they are seeking to become, potentially can somewhat merge with their own field. And so in some ways it's a heavenly body or an ascended quality coming from heaven down to earth, but also potentially it's just the subtle energetics of the body, the subtle body being available for
Mhm.
that being available for that which is always around and
Right.
accessible, but it's us that's not accessible to it. It's these energies are always available, but
Right.
we have cloudiness, or we're not fully transparent to the divine qualities that exist all around us. And yeah, I think ignorance is often used to describe why or what prevents that from manifesting. An interesting thing about this technique is like you were talking about, this churning of the subjective reality. It's literally inviting the ignorance of our own condition to emerge in the consciousness of our own light. And over time, when that's purified, then what's there is this transparency that then can become suitable for these divine qualities to then be recognized, potentially.
Right.
Something to do with that. And maybe, you know, it doesn't specify. It says perfected ones come from heaven and approve such behavior. So approve such behavior. Maybe that means that they're guiding, or they are allowing their presence to be known in our life through such good behavior.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of when we talk about the Guru Gita, there's Vigraha and Anugraha, and one is grace and the other one is resistance. And so the approval is really the grace. And so by doing this practice, as you're describing, it's like this idea of psyche and eros keeps coming up, because this transparency is this vessel of the psyche that gets cleaned, that it becomes a proper vessel for the libido of divine qualities. So libido is undifferentiated generally, and through this practice we develop the ability to differentiate different qualities, different personalities, different attained ones, for instance. Their libido comes in, and so we get the qualities of that subjectivity, of that energy, that power, and it can't fully come through unless the psyche has the proper orientation, the transparency as you're describing. It's a really cool way of looking at it. And so, wow, so you sing songs to the archangels. Is that where do you get those songs from?
It's from the Santo Daime tradition. They're sung in Portuguese, but the root is Latin. And yeah, I'm just a beginner at it. It's just a fascination. But there is many songs to the Seraphim archangels, Archangel Miguel, Archangel Raphael, and Archangel Gabriel are the main 4 archetypes that are sung to, which some would say overlay with the archetypes of the planets. And so in some ways, it's just yet another way to anthropomorphize and understand the largeness, the vastness of the planets which occupy our astral skies, in a context of these heavenly possibilities. Of course, there are many different interpretations of the planets in deity form, but these are one of them. And also the deities remain distinct from the planets as well, in that they can also take on forms that are more anthropomorphized as more human.
Gotcha.
And there is this point where they, it's almost like this coming down quality where they can be very human and then also, very divine, to the point where Archangel Miguel can even be merged with this concept of the master, of that which is unfathomable by our human minds, that which is totally merged with the concept of source consciousness, down to a human-ish archetype, even though not quite human. It's similar to the guru archetype, where they're human in human flesh, yet you worship them as God themselves, that can go all the way to this concept of the supreme reality. And so in the same way, they're a devotee of Divine Mother, they're a devotee of this particular form of the Divine Mother, and they use these tools to access that Divine Mother archetype, but also their God or the supreme reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I never knew that there was anything in Christianity about the planets.
Yeah, it's I suppose it's a bit more esoteric, and some people may debate me on that. But I do believe that the framework for traditional Christian mysticism is very much compatible with the traditional systems of the Vedic deity lineages, and also the East African Orishas. And I think the archetypes of the universe present themselves, and it's objective in that, well, some may say it's objective, they exist, these archetypes of the universe, and it's our subjective experience of them which creates these different forms for them.
Mm-hmm.
But this cross-cultural analysis of the planets even, and the archetypes that they hold, although there's many differences in interpretations, I would say that there is a patterning that is noticeable through different systems,
Mm-hmm.
including Christianity, even though it's not talked about as much because of I would say the scientific discourse around what is true, what is not true, can get touchy. And that's why there's so many different churches in Christianity, because people disagreed, and things fragmented, and then through that there was a lot of disassociation with things that didn't agree or didn't
Right.
compute with a particular being.
Sure.
And then therefore over time the information became less available and less open to people's subjective interpretation, and more based upon power dynamic. And
Sure.
we know the story.
Sure. So it sounds like what you're talking about is sort of like the Apocrypha and the Gnostic tradition of Christianity, not so much like the New Testament.
No, not so much the New Testament. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I think the New Testament, I think if you look hard enough, you could possibly see it. It's I'm not a Bible student necessarily. I've studied the Vedas a lot more, but I do find that the archetypes to be curious and interesting to look at, and not necessarily to take literally. But then again, it's a whole other area of study that I haven't spent that much time focusing on. There's just so much.
Likewise, yeah. It's been coming up in my mind a little bit more, just because I've been talking with some friends about Christianity more than I normally have it in my mind. One of the things that I've been reading, the psychology of the unconscious, and Jung mentioned towards the end of the book this debate among Christian saints as to the nature of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And they Jung sort of settled on this perspective. I can't remember which saint his name was, that he said, pure evil doesn't exist. In the same way that absolute Kelvin or absolute zero Kelvin doesn't exist, the world has varying degrees of heat in it, in the same way that everything in existence has some degree of goodness in it. And the thing that we would perceive as evil is something that is deprived of good. And what sounds to me conducive to this discussion is making ourselves transparent, is making ourselves conducive to the good.
Mm-hmm.
And by becoming resistant, or falling into these traps of becoming reactive, or you know, caught up on all these different things, is cutting ourselves off from the good and ultimately falling from what the benefits are of being in relationship to good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot because it's super universally applicable.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I really like that a lot. Yeah, because it uses physics as the basis for this interpretation, and heat being associated with good, and also frequency and vibration that is created through heat. Yeah, and then there's also there's a spectrum that goes from 0 to infinity, right, in one direction, and then there is potentially another let's call it axis that can interact with that first spectrum. And so then there's these qualities that then start to become fractal in nature, where there is this good lack of good spectrum, and then there is, maybe let's call it true, there is a true lack of true spectrum, or all these other quantifiable spectrums that maybe our mind can't even comprehend with words, because they actually exist on a level of frequency and vibration. And potentially at a certain point, it can become all of these different spectrums interacting with each other, and being able to track that with our mind is impossible because of all of the exponential factors that could play into that. And what comes to mind is how we as humans can't judge each other based upon the qualities of good and bad, because there are all these different factors which are involved, that interplay, right? And so that's why, interestingly, Christianity is in my opinion one of the best examples of don't judge people. Let people have their own interpretation of reality, and let God or source consciousness judge people and determine people's karma or fate. But it seems Christians are just so into judging each other and critiquing each other and creating these moral standards of what's true and not true. Anyway, so it's this one of these contradictions that I find to be somewhat humorous, but also sad, in that I find that it does the complexity of the tradition disservice when it's reduced to that kind of obtuse, interference of people's realities, because of all of the complexity that exists in the universe.
Right.
Like, who are we to tell others how to be or how to act? And something that my friend always reminds me of is Jesus was the one in the slums, helping people that were most downtrodden, helping people that had the most illnesses, the most misfortunes in life, without judgment, but truly with a compassionate heart. And to judge people by their works, not by their words, is another one of his kind of axioms. Judge people by what they do in their life, how they treat people. Through those fruits, you can get a sense of who somebody is, and not what they just say and sound fancy in front of a podium so that people will donate to their church. It's a whole different world.
Yeah, and I almost think that sometimes the difficulties themselves are even potentially as useful as the things that are commendable. Seeing how, like Khalil Gibran would say, be grateful for the people who make your life hell. They're the ones that are truly sent by God. That sort of idea is really, in a lot of ways, what this meditation is about: confronting those things and bringing them into the light, and then properly putting them in their place. Like from the bottom up, we are able to, what we don't know, we can't even deal with. But once they come up, if we have the objectivity to pluck them from their floating in space and putting them where the proper place. The difficulty is when those moments come up, it's so easy to have microaggressions of, when you're plucking them, you have to do it, like you say, with like Jesus, with all love, doing without any judgment, just saying that's this is that thing, and that's where it goes. And I think that's a lot of what this meditation is about, is developing a stability, developing a sense of stability and centeredness, so that when you know the thing that you should be doing, you're able to do it, not only do it, but do it with a joyful heart. One of my teachers, Shrima, would always say, when you're truthful, your heart is at peace. And sometimes I find myself being spitefully truthful, or I use truth as a weapon. That doesn't make my heart peaceful. Even if I'm telling the truth, it's I'm not doing it. I could do it in a nicer way. And
Right.
This sort of meditation keeps on reminding us that it's the heart is that place that is constantly reminding us of what is going on the interaction between the inner and the outer. When it starts beating fast, you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And the peace is undeniable.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really interesting phrase that she has. And true, if we were just to look at that word, as you just mentioned, it's more than just being true. So true has this fractaling quality to it that I was speaking to earlier, where it's not just about being true, but there's also a need for kindness in the truth. And so in that way, just the word true, there's a spectrum of, okay, this is 100% true, and then this is totally lie. And this is maybe in the middle, where I'm just saying things that aren't necessarily a lie, but they're avoiding the truth as well. And so that's one spectrum. And then a different intersecting spectrum could be kindness or compassion or love or tenderness. And so in that way, true takes on a whole different context when we're looking at it from all of these points of view. And that's just one particular virtue. And imagine all of the virtues of the universe being measured in these complex, nuanced ways. And for us to think that the creator themselves of these virtues couldn't possibly measure them is silly. Of course, if something is created, then it's perfectly understood in impeccable detail. And so in that way, it's like we're always interacting with this, the possibility of refinement of not just what that phrase is that Shrima said, which I tend to agree with, but also the nuance and subtlety of what it means in terms of, okay, how to have my heart at rest. Not only do I have to speak the truth, but I have to do it kindly, and potentially with also a sense of firmness and clarity too. And like that, it can keep unfolding.
Yeah. That's I feel like that's a idea we could riff on for hours. And but I think we should end it here. It was really cool little tiny chapter, but a lot of little stuff in there. We'll catch up next time with a magic spell for the far journey, which we might have to break up into more than one segment, but that sounds like a pretty interesting one. And until next time, as always, Daniel, it's great to have you on. And
yeah, it's super fun.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And we hope you all come back for the next time. And until then, we will see you. Thanks a lot.